The boardroom fell silent the moment Evelyn Carter slid a single sheet of paper across the polished walnut table. "Security will escort you out." The quiet man looked down at the termination notice without touching it. No anger, no pleading, no surprise. Instead, he slowly removed his company badge, placed it beside the paper, and looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. "You've just made the most expensive mistake of your life." A few executives laughed. One even whispered, "Finally." The quiet employee simply nodded once, stood up, and walked out without looking back. Nobody noticed that. At the exact same moment, 3 major clients received emails that would change everything. 3 weeks earlier, Evelyn Carter wasn't born rich. At 43, she'd built Carter Dynamics from a struggling cybersecurity startup into one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. Forbes called her ruthless. Employees called her terrifying. Investors called her brilliant. She accepted only one of those descriptions. Brilliant. Every morning she arrived at exactly 6:15 a.m., drank black coffee from the same chipped mug she'd owned since college, and walked every floor before most employees arrived. She believed successful companies were built by discipline, not comfort. No birthday parties, no long lunches, no excuses. She demanded perfection because she'd spent 20 years sacrificing everything else. Her marriage, her friendships, even her health. She told herself it had been worth it. Most days she believed that. But lately, something inside the company felt different. People stopped talking when she entered rooms. Managers smiled too quickly. Projects that should have taken weeks somehow finished overnight. The numbers looked perfect. Too perfect. It felt less like success, and more like a stage performance. But Evelyn had no proof. Only instinct. And instinct had never failed her before. What she didn't know was that someone else had noticed the cracks months earlier. Someone almost invisible. Someone nobody ever invited into meetings. Someone whose name most executives barely remembered. Daniel Brooks. Daniel had worked at Carter Dynamics for nearly 9 years. No promotions, no awards, no speeches at company events. He wasn't the smartest engineer. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't ambitious in the way executives admired. He simply stayed. Every morning he arrived before sunrise. Every evening he left after sunset. His desk sat in the far corner of infrastructure operations, surrounded by outdated servers that most employees joked belonged in a museum. He rarely joined conversations, rarely smiled, rarely even looked up when people walked past. Some called him antisocial. Others assumed he lacked confidence. The truth was much simpler. Daniel listened far more than he spoke. People revealed astonishing secrets when they believed no one was paying attention. And Daniel remembered everything. Every careless joke. Every whispered complaint. Every unexplained system request. Every executive asking for access they shouldn't need. Patterns fascinated him. Humans were simply another kind of system. Eventually, every system revealed its weakness. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Daniel noticed something impossible. A financial database had been accessed at 2:13 a.m. The credentials belonged to a vice president who had been attending a conference in Chicago that entire week. Daniel checked again, then again. No mistake. Someone had cloned executive credentials. He documented the anomaly, created a report, sent it through the proper channels. No response. 3 days later, the report disappeared. Not ignored, deleted. Daniel frowned for the first time in weeks. Who had authority to erase security reports? That question refused to leave him. Across the building, Evelyn was fighting a different battle. The company was preparing for the biggest acquisition in its history. A billion-dollar merger with Helix Quantum. If successful, Carter Dynamics would double in value overnight. Investors were euphoric. Financial media predicted Evelyn would become one of the youngest female CEOs ever to lead a Fortune 100 technology company. Failure wasn't an option. Every department was under impossible pressure. Mistakes became enemies. Questions became delays. Anyone slowing momentum quickly found themselves isolated. And unfortunately, Daniel kept asking questions. Why are executive credentials bypassing multi-factor authentication? Why were financial logs modified after audit? Why are archived backups disappearing? Each email sounded calm, professional, respectful, but to exhausted managers, Daniel wasn't protecting the company. He was creating problems. Soon people began avoiding him. If Daniel emails you, one director joked, your week is ruined. The room laughed. Daniel heard every word while replacing a network switch outside the conference room. He said nothing. But he added another observation to the growing pattern inside his notebook. Fear changes people faster than greed. Then came Melissa Grant, newly hired Chief Operating Officer, 46, confident, elegant, always smiling. Unlike Evelyn, Melissa remembered birthdays. She complimented employees. She brought pastries on Fridays. Within a month, people adored her. She told Evelyn exactly what every exhausted CEO wanted to hear. We need positivity. We need trust. We need less paranoia. Evelyn found Melissa refreshing. Finally, someone focused on growth instead of endless technical concerns. Whenever Daniel's reports surfaced, Melissa sighed dramatically. He's technically gifted, she admitted, but emotionally, she shrugged. He sees conspiracies everywhere. Other executives nodded. Confirmation bias spread quietly through the room. Soon Daniel acquired an unofficial nickname, the alarm bell. Whenever he sent another report, managers rolled their eyes before opening it. Exactly what someone wanted. The question was, who? Late Friday evening, nearly everyone had gone home. Daniel remained alone. Again. He compared 6 months of server logs with archived billing records. One inconsistency became 10. 10 became 43. Money wasn't simply disappearing. Entire digital assets were being copied. Patents, source code, prototype designs. Someone wasn't stealing cash. Someone was stealing the company's future. Daniel printed every document. He didn't trust digital copies anymore. As he placed them into a plain brown folder, he noticed movement through the glass wall. Melissa, standing alone, using an executive access card inside a restricted records room. At 11:42 p.m., she wasn't supposed to be there. Daniel instinctively reached for his phone, then stopped. No photographs. No accusations. Not yet. He needed proof. Real proof. Otherwise, he would become the story instead of the theft. As Melissa disappeared into the darkness, Daniel quietly locked the folder inside an old filing cabinet almost nobody remembered existed. Then he whispered 4 words to himself. They're almost ready. He wasn't talking about the documents. And if he was right, someone inside Carter Dynamics was about to make the first move. The only question was whether Evelyn Carter would realize who her greatest ally really was before she destroyed the only person trying to save her company. Monday morning began with applause. Not for Daniel, for Melissa. Standing beside Evelyn in the company's all-hands meeting, Melissa announced that Carter Dynamics had officially entered the final phase of negotiations with Helix Quantum. The billion-dollar acquisition was now only weeks away. Employees cheered, cameras flashed, and investors watching the live stream celebrated online. Daniel stood in the back of the room, unnoticed as always. When the applause faded, Evelyn made one statement that sent a chill through him. "We've reached this point because we've learned to ignore distractions and focus on what truly matters." Several executives glanced toward Daniel. The message hadn't been accidental. He quietly lowered his eyes, but inside, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Someone wanted him isolated before the merger closed. The question was why. That afternoon, Daniel unlocked the forgotten filing cabinet hidden in an abandoned server room. Inside lay months of printed reports, access logs, financial discrepancies, security alerts that had mysteriously vanished from company servers. One detail caught his attention immediately. Every deleted report had disappeared within minutes of being reviewed by the same executive assistant. Not Melissa. Not Evelyn. A woman named Karen Ellis. Karen had worked for Evelyn for almost 12 years. Everyone trusted her. She remembered birthdays, scheduled meetings, protected Evelyn's calendar like a fortress. She seemed invisible because she was always nearby. Daniel frowned. Was Karen involved? Or was someone simply using her access? Another false trail? Or the missing link? Meanwhile, Evelyn couldn't ignore the growing pressure. The Helix board demanded flawless financial audits before signing. Wall Street analysts expected record earnings. The directors wanted bigger profits. Every delay meant millions. Sleep had become optional. Her ex-husband, Michael, left another voicemail she never answered. "You can't build a company if you destroy yourself first." She deleted it without listening to the end. Work always came first. That had always been her greatest strength, and her greatest weakness. Late Tuesday afternoon, Daniel requested a private meeting with Evelyn. To everyone's surprise, she accepted. He entered her office carrying only a thin brown folder. "I believe someone inside the executive team is stealing proprietary assets." Evelyn didn't react. "I've heard similar concerns before." Daniel carefully placed several printed documents on her desk. These files were deleted from the company archive. She scanned them. Server logs, authorization histories, timestamp comparisons. Technically accurate. Still, something bothered her. Why bring paper copies? Because someone keeps deleting the digital evidence. Silence filled the room. For a brief second, Evelyn almost believed him. Then Melissa knocked gently and entered. "I hate interrupting." She smiled warmly. "But the Helix attorneys are waiting." Her eyes briefly landed on Daniel, then on the documents. Only for a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Daniel did. Melissa smiled politely. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" Evelyn sighed. "Daniel believes we have an internal conspiracy." Melissa looked genuinely concerned. "Oh, Daniel." There wasn't a hint of mockery in her voice, only disappointment. "I know how seriously you take security." She turned toward Evelyn. "But remember the FBI audit last quarter? They found nothing." Daniel spoke calmly. "Because someone removed the evidence before they arrived." Melissa tilted her head. "Or because there wasn't any." Neither raised their voice. Neither became emotional. That made Evelyn even more uncomfortable. Only one of them could be right. But which one? That evening, Karen accidentally walked into the records archive and found Daniel reviewing old backup inventories. He quickly closed the cabinet. "You startled me." Karen laughed awkwardly. "I could say the same." She hesitated, then quietly whispered, "You should stop asking questions." Daniel looked at her. "Is that advice?" "It's a warning." "From who?" Karen's smile disappeared. I never said anyone sent me. Then she hurried away before he could ask another question. Daniel watched her leave. Was she protecting herself, or protecting him? The next morning something impossible happened. The company's secure research server went offline. Every engineer received the same notification. Critical data corruption detected. Panic spread instantly. Development stopped. Video calls exploded with accusations. The timing couldn't have been worse. Helix executives were scheduled to inspect the systems that afternoon. Melissa immediately organized an emergency meeting. Evelyn entered furious. Who touched the server? Nobody answered. The IT director nervously cleared his throat. We found unauthorized administrative access. Whose credentials? He swallowed. Daniel Brooks. Every head slowly turned toward him. Daniel didn't move. That's impossible. The logs appeared on the projector. His username, his employee ID, his digital certificate. Everything matched perfectly. Even Daniel had to admit, it looked real. Security escorted him to a conference room. Not because anyone had proven guilt, because appearances mattered. An investigator began asking routine questions. Where were you last night? At home. Can anyone confirm? No. You worked late Friday? Yes. You've repeatedly accused executives of misconduct? Yes. The investigator wrote silently. From the outside, Daniel looked exactly like a disgruntled employee preparing sabotage. Even Daniel could see it. Someone had built the perfect story, one that required no lies, only carefully arranged truths. Across the building, Melissa comforted anxious employees. She ordered lunch for exhausted engineers. She thanked everyone for staying calm. People admired her composure. If we work together, she smiled, we'll recover. She appeared to be holding the company together. Exactly what a future CEO should look like. The board noticed. So did Evelyn. For the first time, she wondered whether Melissa possessed something she herself never had. People trusted her. That evening, Daniel was finally released. No evidence beyond suspicious logs. No arrest. No formal charges. But his access badge no longer opened most doors. Unofficially, he had become the prime suspect. He returned to his nearly empty office. His desk had been searched. Nothing stolen. Nothing obvious, anyway. Then he noticed something strange. One photograph had moved. It showed the infrastructure team from 8 years earlier. Most faces had left the company long ago. Except one. Daniel stared at the picture. Someone had folded the corner over a single employee. Not him. Not Karen. A systems architect named Victor Hale. Victor had resigned 6 years earlier after a quiet disagreement with senior management. No farewell party. No announcement. Just gone. Daniel suddenly remembered something Victor once said during a late-night maintenance shift. If someone ever steals this company, they won't do it from outside. They'll convince everyone they're saving it. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He rushed toward the old employee archive. Victor's personnel file was missing. Not archived, erased. Someone had removed every trace that he'd ever worked there. Daniel whispered to himself. They're cleaning history. Then his phone vibrated. An unknown number. No caller. ID. He answered carefully. A distorted voice spoke only one sentence. Stop looking at Melissa. The line disconnected. Daniel froze. Why would someone warn him away from Melissa? If every piece of evidence pointed directly at her. Unless someone wanted him to stop looking in the wrong direction. And for the first time, Daniel considered a terrifying possibility. Melissa might not be the mastermind. She might be the next victim. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The anonymous phone call echoed in his mind. Stop looking at Melissa. If Melissa wasn't the mastermind, then someone wanted Daniel focused on the wrong target. That realization changed everything. At dawn, he drove to a small storage unit on the outskirts of the city. Years earlier, Victor Hale had insisted that every important security investigation should have an offline backup. One day, Victor had said, the system itself will become the crime scene. Daniel finally understood what he meant. Hidden inside an old fireproof box were encrypted drives Victor had asked him to keep after he resigned. Daniel had never opened them. Until now. As the files decrypted, Daniel's face slowly lost all color. Victor hadn't resigned. He had been forced out after discovering a corporate espionage network operating inside Carter Dynamics. The network wasn't stealing money. It specialized in quietly weakening companies before billion-dollar acquisitions. Executives were manipulated. Evidence disappeared. Stock prices remained stable. Then, after the acquisition closed, priceless intellectual property quietly migrated elsewhere. The mastermind never appeared on company payroll. He never attended meetings. He never signed contracts. He simply controlled people from the shadows. And there, buried in hundreds of emails, appeared one familiar name, Karen Ellis. Not as a criminal, as an FBI confidential informant. Daniel leaned back in disbelief. Karen had been trying to expose the conspiracy for years, which meant she wasn't watching Evelyn. She was protecting her. Across town, Evelyn entered the Helix board meeting believing the crisis was finally behind her. The corrupted servers had been restored. Daniel had been suspended. Melissa had reassured investors. Everything appeared stable, until Helix's lead attorney interrupted the presentation. We've received anonymous evidence suggesting Carter Dynamics has suffered repeated intellectual property breaches. The room froze. Someone had sent confidential documents directly to Helix. Every executive immediately looked toward Evelyn. The acquisition was suspended indefinitely. Company shares began falling before the meeting had even ended. Within 30 minutes, hundreds of millions of dollars disappeared from the company's market value. The nightmare had begun. Melissa found Evelyn sitting alone in her office. For the first time in years, the CEO looked defeated. I trusted everyone, Evelyn whispered. Melissa quietly closed the door. We can recover. Evelyn laughed bitterly. Can we? Melissa hesitated. There was something she had hidden for months. I need to tell you something. Before she could continue, the office door burst open. Karen entered, breathless. They're deleting everything. Neither woman understood. Karen threw a flash drive onto the desk. The backup servers. They've started wiping every archive. Melissa stared at Karen. You knew? Karen nodded. I've known pieces for years. Evelyn stood. Why didn't you tell me? Karen's eyes filled with tears. Because every time I tried, someone got there first. At that exact moment, Daniel entered headquarters. His security badge no longer worked, so he walked through the employee entrance behind a delivery crew. Nobody stopped him. Nobody noticed him. Just like always. He headed straight toward the disaster recovery center. The server room was empty, except for one man, the chief financial officer, Richard Lawson, the quietest executive in the company. 58, polite, forgettable, never involved in office politics, never raised his voice. Daniel suddenly remembered something Victor once said. The smartest thief is never the loudest person. Richard calmly unplugged another backup array, then looked over his shoulder. I wondered when you'd figure it out. No panic, no denial, only disappointment. You were supposed to leave after they fired you. Daniel stepped forward. It was never Melissa. Richard smiled. She was useful. You framed her. I encouraged assumptions. And Karen? Richard laughed softly. She spent years chasing ghosts I created. Daniel secretly activated the voice recorder on his phone. Richard continued speaking. Do you know why companies fail? Daniel remained silent. Because leaders love certainty. They trust confidence. They ignore quiet people. Richard slowly walked between the server racks. I didn't steal Carter Dynamics. I convinced everyone to hand it to me. Every deleted report, every fake login, every forged credential, every anonymous leak. He had orchestrated all of it. Daniel asked the only question that mattered. Why? Richard's smile disappeared. Because Helix was never buying Carter Dynamics. Daniel frowned. Richard continued. They were buying its patents. Once the acquisition collapsed, another company would purchase them for pennies. Years of innovation, destroyed deliberately, not for billions, for control. Before Richard could destroy the final server, the lights suddenly switched on. FBI agents entered from every exit. Karen walked in behind them. This is over. Richard looked genuinely surprised. You? Karen smiled for the first time in years. I stopped chasing ghosts. I started following accountants. Richard slowly raised his hands. His expression remained strangely peaceful. I still won. No, Evelyn's voice answered from the doorway. You underestimated one employee. She looked directly at Daniel. I did. Weeks later, the headlines shocked the business world. CFO arrested in corporate espionage ring. Acquisition fraud prevented by internal employee. CEO rebuilds company after historic betrayal. Richard accepted a plea deal. Authorities uncovered similar schemes, targeting 6 other technology companies. Karen finally revealed she had worked with federal investigators throughout the final months. Melissa publicly admitted her own mistake. I cared too much about harmony. I ignored uncomfortable questions because they disrupted progress. It was a painful confession, but an honest one. Evelyn called one final company-wide meeting. Employees expected another corporate speech. Instead, she walked onto the stage carrying a small cardboard box. Inside lay Daniel's old security badge. She held it up. I fired the only employee who refused to lie to me. Silence filled the auditorium. I mistook quietness for weakness. I mistook confidence for competence. And I nearly lost everything because of it. She walked down from the stage and stopped in front of Daniel. In 20 years. This is the hardest apology I've ever made. She handed him the badge. I'm asking you to come back. Daniel looked at it for several long seconds. Everyone expected him to accept immediately. Instead, he asked one question. If I return, will you listen the first time? Evelyn nodded. No matter how inconvenient the truth is. Daniel smiled for the first time in the entire story. A small, genuine smile. Then he took the badge. The room erupted in applause. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the wisest. And the quietest person isn't always the weakest. Sometimes the people who ask uncomfortable questions are the only ones standing between success and disaster. Trust should be earned through integrity, not confidence. And ignoring inconvenient truths can cost far more than listening to them. If you were Evelyn, Would you have trusted Daniel before it was too late? Or would you have made the same decision based on the evidence in front of you? Let us know what you would have done, and at what moment you first realized who the real mastermind was.